The hydraulic fluid pooled beneath the F-16's landing gear like black blood on concrete, each drop marking time in the suffocating heat of Kandahar airfield. Staff Sergeant Vega Castellanos knelt beside the aircraft, her calloused hands moving with surgical precision across the damaged hydraulic line. Around her, the maintenance bay hummed with the controlled chaos of a forward operating base. Mechanics shouting over the whine of jet engines, the distant thump of rotor blades, and the ever-present crackle of radio chatter that served as the heartbeat of military aviation. But something was wrong. Not with the aircraft. Vega could fix anything that flew. The wrongness sat deeper, in the way Lieutenant Colonel Morrison's eyes lingered on her left shoulder blade when he thought she wasn't looking. In the way General Hayes had gone silent during yesterday's briefing when she'd rolled up her sleeves to point at the tactical display. In the way conversations stopped when she entered rooms, only to resume in hushed tones after she left. The tattoo had been there for 8 years, inked into her skin during a drunken night in Seoul after her first deployment. A simple design, twin eagles diving through storm clouds, their talons extended, wings swept back in attack formation. To most, it looked like standard military ink, the kind of patriotic imagery that decorated half the arms in any squadron. But General Hayes had seen it differently. His face had drained of color, his weathered hand unconsciously moving to touch the raised scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. Castellanos, Morrison's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. She didn't look up from the hydraulic coupling, continuing to thread the replacement line with steady fingers. General wants to see you. Now. The wrench slipped in her grip, gouging a thin line across her knuckles. Blood welled up, mixing with the hydraulic fluid on her hands. She'd been waiting for this summons for 3 days, ever since Hayes had first seen the tattoo. Ever since she'd watched recognition dawn in his eyes like sunrise over a battlefield. "Tell him I'll be there in 10, she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake building in her chest. "This bird needs to fly." Morrison's boots shifted on the concrete. "Vega," he said now. She finally looked up, meeting his gaze with eyes the color of desert storms. "And I said 10 minutes, sir. Unless you want to explain to the colonel why his close air support is grounded because someone couldn't wait for proper maintenance protocols." The lieutenant colonel's jaw tightened, but he nodded and walked away. Vega returned to her work, but her hands trembled now, and she knew it wasn't from the caffeine. The maintenance bay felt smaller somehow, the walls pressing in like the sides of a coffin. Other mechanics moved around her with practiced efficiency, but she could feel their sideways glances, their whispered speculation. Word traveled fast on a base this size. By tomorrow, everyone would know that General Hayes had personally requested to see the mechanic with the eagle tattoo. The question that would follow was simple. Why? Vega knew the answer. She'd known it for 8 years, carried it like shrapnel in her chest, sharp and buried deep. The tattoo wasn't just ink on skin. It was a signature, a calling card, a piece of evidence that connected her to something that officially never happened, to a mission that existed only in redacted files and the nightmares of the few who survived it, to a night over North Korea when 2 F-22 Raptors had vanished from radar, their pilots presumed dead, their mission scrubbed from the record. She finished tightening the hydraulic coupling and stood, wiping her hands on a rag that came away streaked with oil and blood. The F-16 sat before her like a sleeping predator, its gray skin scarred by countless missions, its weapons pylons empty but somehow still menacing. Soon, another pilot would climb into that cockpit, trust their life to the systems she'd just repaired, and disappear into the hostile sky above Afghanistan. But for now, General Hayes was waiting. And after 8 years of silence, of hiding in plain sight among wrenches and engine parts, it was time for Staff Sergeant Vega Castellanos to remember who she used to be. The walk to the command center felt like a death march. Each step echoed off the concrete barriers and prefabricated walls that defined the geography of modern warfare. Soldiers and airmen moved past her with purpose, their faces set in the thousand-yard stare that came from too many deployments, too many friends lost, too many promises broken by politicians who'd never heard a shot fired in anger. Vega had that same stare once, before the mission that erased her from existence, before the tattoo, before she'd traded her pilot's wings for a mechanic's wrench and learned to disappear into the background noise of military life. The command center door loomed ahead, guarded by two Marines whose eyes tracked her approach with professional interest. Inside, she knew, General Hayes would be waiting with questions she wasn't supposed to answer about things that weren't supposed to exist. About a night when Captain Vega, Phoenix, Castellanos had flown into North Korean airspace and emerged 8 hours later as the sole survivor of an operation that killed everyone else who knew her real name. She paused at the door, her hand resting on the cool metal handle. Somewhere overhead, she could hear the distant rumble of aircraft engines, the sound of freedom, of power, of everything she'd given up to stay alive. The tattoo on her shoulder blade seemed to burn against her skin, the twin eagles stretching their wings as if preparing to take flight once more. General Hayes was waiting, and one way or another, Phoenix was about to rise from the ashes. The command center buzzed with the controlled intensity of a military nerve center at war. Multiple screens displayed real-time intelligence feeds from across the theater, drone footage of mountain passes, satellite imagery of suspected insurgent camps, and the green phosphorescent glow of radar sweeps that painted the sky in electronic brushstrokes. Radio operators spoke in the clipped, professional tones that turned life and death into a series of alphanumeric codes, their voices creating a symphony of organized violence. General Hayes stood with his back to the entrance, his shoulders rigid beneath the weight of 4 stars and 30 years of command. The scar on his face caught the blue light from the tactical displays, turning the raised tissue into a silver line that mapped the geography of old violence. When he heard the door close behind Vega, he didn't turn around immediately. Instead, he continued to stare at the largest screen, which showed a satellite view of the Tora Bora Mountains, the same jagged peaks where so many operations had ended in failure and blood. Sergeant Castellanos, his voice carried the weight of authority and something else, something that sounded almost like grief. "Thank you for joining us." Vega remained at attention, her eyes fixed on a point 6 inches above the general's head. Around them, the staff continued their work, but she could feel their attention like heat from a fire. Whatever was about to happen, it would become legend within hours, story fodder for late-night conversations in barracks and mess halls across the base. At ease, Hayes finally turned, and Vega saw that his face had aged decades in the 3 days since their first encounter. The lines around his eyes had deepened, and there was a tremor in his hands that spoke of too much coffee and too little sleep. "Close the door behind you. This conversation is classified." The room fell silent except for the electronic hum of equipment and the distant sound of aircraft engines. Vega moved to close the door, noting how the general's staff suddenly found urgent tasks that required their immediate attention. Within moments, she and Hayes were alone except for a single aide, a young captain whose name tape read TORRES, and whose eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone trusted with secrets. "Show me your shoulder," Hayes said without preamble. The request hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Vega's throat tightened, but she reached up and rolled the fabric of her uniform shirt down, exposing the tattoo that had haunted her for 8 years. The twin eagles seemed to move in the artificial light, their wings spread wide, their talons extended in eternal attack formation. Hayes stepped closer, his breathing shallow and rapid. His scarred fingers reached toward the tattoo but stopped just short of touching her skin. In the blue glow of the command center, Vega could see tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, "Phoenix, you're supposed to be dead." The name hit her like a physical blow. Phoenix. Her call sign from another life, another war, another version of herself that was supposed to have died over North Korea 8 years ago. She'd buried that name so deep that sometimes she forgot it herself, lost in the daily routine of maintenance schedules and hydraulic repairs. But hearing it spoken aloud brought everything flooding back. The weight of a flight suit, the feel of a control stick in her hands, the terrifying beauty of flying at Mach 2 through enemy airspace with nothing but skill and luck keeping death at bay. "Permission to speak freely, sir." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Hayes nodded, his eyes never leaving the tattoo. "Phoenix died over Pyongyang," she said. "I'm just a mechanic now." The general's laugh was bitter and sharp. "A mechanic? Christ, Phoenix, do you have any idea what we went through? The search and rescue operations, the diplomatic channels. We nearly started World War III looking for you and Raptor 27. Raptor 27. The call sign hit her like shrapnel, opening wounds that had never properly healed. Major David Iceman Chen, her wingman on that final mission. Her friend. Her partner in the kind of flying that pushed the boundaries of physics and human endurance. The man who died screaming her name over the radio, while North Korean surface-to-air missiles turned his F-22 into a fireball that lit up the night sky like a falling star. "Iceman didn't make it out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We know, we found the wreckage 6 months later, but you." Hayes moved to a secure terminal and began entering his access codes. "You vanished. Complete electronic blackout. No emergency beacon, no radio contact, no satellite track. We assumed you'd been captured or killed. The mission was declared a failure. All records were classified beyond top secret, and your families were told you died in a training accident." The screen flickered to life, displaying a file marked with so many classification warnings that even looking at it probably violated several federal laws. Vega's breath caught as she saw her own face staring back at her, younger, harder, with the confident smile of someone who believed she was invincible. Captain Vega, Phoenix, Castellanos, pilot of F-22A Raptor tail number 54107, officially killed in action during a training exercise over the Pacific Ocean. "Why?" Hayes asked, turning back to face her. "Why did you let us think you were dead? Why did you disappear? And why the hell are you fixing jets in Afghanistan instead of flying them?" The questions came like artillery fire, each one designed to break down her defenses and extract the truth. But Vega had been carrying this secret for 8 years, had built her new life around it like a fortress. She'd learned to live with the weight of it, to function despite the constant ache of being someone she wasn't. She pulled her shirt back up, covering the tattoo, burying Phoenix once again beneath the uniform of Staff Sergeant Vega Castellanos, aircraft mechanic, nobody special. But the general's eyes held her like a targeting lock, and she knew that this time there would be no escape. "Because, sir," she said finally, "the mission isn't over." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of rotors and the electronic whisper of classified communications. Hayes stared at her with the intensity of a man trying to solve a puzzle that could either save the world or destroy it. Behind him, the tactical displays continued their endless dance of electronic intelligence, painting pictures of a war that had no clear beginning and would have no clean ending. Captain Torres shifted slightly, his hand moving unconsciously toward his sidearm, a gesture that spoke of training and paranoia in equal measure. In the world of special operations and black projects, the line between ally and enemy could shift as quickly as the wind, and trust was a luxury that could get you killed. "Explain," Hayes said, his voice carrying the full weight of his rank and authority. Vega took a breath that seemed to last forever, tasting the recycled air of the command center, the metallic tang of electronics, and the faint ozone smell that came from too many classified systems operating in too small a space. When she spoke, her voice carried the precise, clipped tones of a briefing officer delivering intelligence that could change the course of a war. "Operation Blackbird wasn't a reconnaissance mission, sir. It was an extraction." She paused, watching Hayes's face for any sign of recognition, any indication that he knew more than he was letting on. We weren't sent to photograph missile sites or count submarines. We were sent to bring someone home. Hayes's scar seemed to darken, the raised tissue catching shadows from the overhead lights. Bring who home? Dr. Liu Weiming, Chinese nuclear physicist. He'd been feeding intelligence to the CIA for 18 months through back channels, providing technical specifications for North Korea's uranium enrichment program. The North Koreans were getting close to discovering his identity, so the agency decided to extract him before he could be compromised. The general moved to the secure terminal and began typing rapidly, his fingers dancing across keys that would access databases most people didn't know existed. Lines of classified text scrolled across the screen, painting a picture in electronic ink of operations that had never officially happened, and people who had never officially existed. Liu Weiming died in a car accident in Beijing 6 months before your mission, Hayes said, reading from the screen. Chinese state media reported it as a traffic fatality. Chinese state media reports what Beijing wants the world to believe, Vega replied. Liu was alive, sir. He was being held in a facility outside Pyongyang, and our mission was to extract him during a 40-minute window when North Korean air defenses would be down for scheduled maintenance. She could see the pieces clicking together in Hayes's mind, the connections forming like a constellation emerging from the darkness. The scar on his face seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, a physical reminder of old wounds and older secrets. But something went wrong, he said. Everything went wrong. The words came out harder than she'd intended, carrying 8 years of guilt and survivor's remorse. The maintenance window was a trap. North Korean intelligence had discovered Liu's communications 6 weeks earlier and had been feeding false information to the agency, setting up an ambush. When Iceman and I penetrated their airspace, half the surface-to-air missiles in the country were waiting for us. Captain Torres was taking notes now, his pen moving across classified paper with the mechanical precision of someone trained to document conversations that would be analyzed by intelligence officers and filed in vaults that existed in the spaces between official records. Iceman took a direct hit 2 minutes into the mission, Vega continued, her voice steady despite the memories that threatened to tear her apart. His Raptor broke up at 20,000 feet. I watched him eject, watched his chute deploy, watched North Korean ground forces converge on his position. I had maybe 30 seconds to decide, abort the mission and try to extract him, or continue to the target and complete the original objective. Hayes leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. What did you choose? I chose Liu. The admission felt like swallowing broken glass. I left Iceman behind and continued to the extraction point. By the time I reached the facility, North Korean fighters were scrambling to intercept me. I had maybe 10 minutes before the entire Air Force would be hunting me across their territory. The command center felt smaller now, the walls pressing in like the cockpit of an aircraft in a power dive. Somewhere outside, she could hear the sound of jets taking off, their engines roaring with the promise of speed and violence, and the terrible freedom that came from flying at the edge of human capability. Did you find him? Hayes asked. Liu. Vega closed her eyes, remembering the moment when she'd found the Chinese physicist in a cell that smelled of fear and desperation. He'd been beaten, tortured, broken in ways that couldn't be repaired by medicine or time. But his mind was intact, and the intelligence he carried could save thousands of lives or end millions, depending on who controlled it. I found him, she said, and I brought him home. Then why? Hayes began, but Vega cut him off with a gesture that belonged to Captain Phoenix Castellanos, fighter pilot, not Staff Sergeant Vega Castellanos, aircraft mechanic. Because bringing him home required sacrificing everything I was, she said, including myself. The weight of that sacrifice hung in the air between them like smoke from a funeral pyre, carrying the acrid smell of burned dreams and abandoned identities. Hayes stared at her with the expression of a man who just realized that everything he thought he knew about a particular war was wrong, that the carefully constructed narrative of victory and defeat was nothing more than a comfortable lie designed to help politicians sleep at night. Outside, the sound of aircraft engines continued their mechanical symphony, reminding everyone in the command center that the war was still happening, still consuming lives and resources and futures with the methodical hunger of a machine designed for nothing but destruction. The extraction had required more than just flying skill and luck. It had required the complete erasure of Captain Phoenix Castellanos from existence, the careful construction of a new identity built from forged documents and altered records, and the kind of deep cover that could only be maintained by never, ever breaking character. For 8 years, she'd been dead to everyone who'd ever known her, buried beneath layers of paperwork and bureaucratic misdirection that made her resurrection impossible. But now General Hayes was staring at her with recognition in his eyes, and she knew that the careful balance she'd maintained for nearly a decade was about to collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Sir," Captain Torres said quietly, "we have a problem." Hayes turned toward his aide, nodding the tension in the younger officer's voice. Torres was pointing at one of the tactical displays, where a new symbol had appeared, a red icon moving across the digital map of Afghanistan with the steady purpose of incoming trouble. "What am I looking at, Captain?" "Unscheduled helicopter flight, sir. Blackhawk inbound from Bagram, ETA 15 minutes. Passengers classified, but the manifest shows authorization from JSOC. Joint Special Operations Command, the organization that coordinated the most sensitive military operations in the world, the kind of missions that existed in the shadows between official policy and practical necessity. If JSOC was sending a helicopter to Kandahar unannounced, it meant that someone very important wanted something very specific, and they wanted it badly enough to risk exposure." Vega felt the familiar chill that came with the recognition of danger approaching at high speed. In her years as Phoenix, she'd learned to trust that instinct, to read the subtle signs that separated routine operations from the kind of missions that left scars on both flesh and soul. "They're coming for me," she said quietly. Hayes turned back to her, his face grim. "How do you know?" "Because Liu Weiming didn't just carry intelligence about North Korean nuclear capabilities, sir. He carried the complete technical specifications for a new type of weapon, something that makes hydrogen bombs look like firecrackers. The Chinese were developing it in partnership with the North Koreans, and the only copy of the research exists in Liu's memory." She moved to the tactical display, pointing at the helicopter symbol that continued its relentless approach toward Kandahar airfield. "For 8 years, Liu has been in protective custody, his identity buried so deep that even I don't know where he is. But if someone has connected me to the original extraction, if they've figured out that Phoenix isn't dead, then they can use you to find him," Hayes finished. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place now, creating a picture that none of them wanted to see. Someone had discovered the connection between the mechanic with the eagle tattoo and the pilot who'd vanished over North Korea 8 years ago. Someone had put together the classified pieces of Operation Blackbird and realized that Captain Phoenix Castellanos was the key to finding the most valuable intelligence asset in modern military history. And that someone was 15 minutes away from landing at Kandahar airfield, with the full authority of the United States military behind them. "Torres," Hayes said, his voice carrying the sharp edge of command authority, "I want base security doubled immediately. No one gets near the aircraft maintenance bay without my personal authorization, and I want the duty officer to prepare for an immediate lockdown. Nothing flies in or out without my express permission." The young captain was already moving toward the communications panel, his fingers flying across secure channels with the efficiency of someone trained to turn generals' orders into actionable reality. Around them, The command center began to shift into a higher state of alert, the ambient noise level rising as duty officers received new instructions and security teams repositioned themselves across the base. But Vega knew it wouldn't be enough. JSOC didn't send helicopters to collect people. They sent them to eliminate problems. And right now, she was the biggest problem in their carefully ordered world, a living reminder of an operation that was supposed to have ended in failure and death. "General," she said, "with respect, sir, you need to let me go." Hayes turned on her with the full force of 30 years of command authority. "Like hell. Sir, you don't understand. If they take me, they'll have everything they need to find Liu. The extraction routes, the safe houses, the contact protocols, it's all in my head. And there are people in our own government who would use that information for things that make North Korean nuclear weapons look like toys." The helicopter was 12 minutes out now, its digital signature moving across the tactical display with mechanical precision. Somewhere aboard that aircraft, men with authorization letters and classified orders were preparing to land at Kandahar and collect a piece of human intelligence that could shift the balance of power in ways that most people couldn't imagine. "Then we fight," Hayes said simply. "Against our own people, sir, that's." "Our own people don't send unscheduled extractions to collect aircraft mechanics," Hayes interrupted. "Our own people don't operate outside official channels to pursue 8-year-old classified operations. Whoever's on that helicopter, Sergeant, they're not here representing the United States of America." The statement hung in the air like a challenge, carrying implications that none of them wanted to fully consider. If Hayes was right, then the helicopter approaching Kandahar wasn't part of an official operation. It was something else, something that existed in the gray spaces between nations and loyalties, where money and power mattered more than flags or constitutions. Captain Torres looked up from his communications panel, his face pale beneath his regulation haircut. "Sir, I've got a problem. Base security is reporting that they're receiving conflicting orders from multiple command authorities. Some units are being told to prepare for VIP arrival protocols. Others are being instructed to implement immediate lockdown procedures." "Someone's playing both sides," Vega said, the pieces clicking together in her mind like a targeting computer acquiring a lock. "They've got people inside our command structure, feeding information and countermanding orders to create confusion." Hayes moved to a different terminal, one that required biometric authentication and carried access to intelligence databases that existed above the level of normal military classification. His fingers danced across keys that unlocked doors to information that could start wars or end them, depending on who controlled the access. "Jesus," he breathed, staring at the screen. "Vega, look at this." She moved to stand beside him, reading over his shoulder as classified text scrolled across the monitor. What she saw made her blood run cold. Purchase orders for military equipment routed through shell corporations. Personnel transfers that placed specific individuals in key positions across multiple command structures. Financial transactions that connected defense contractors to foreign intelligence services through a web of offshore accounts and legal loopholes. "It's a conspiracy," Torres said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's business," Vega corrected grimly. "Liu's intelligence isn't just about weapons, it's about the future of warfare itself. Control of that information is worth billions of dollars to the right buyers, and there are people in our own government who see that as a better investment than national security." The helicopter was 8 minutes out now, close enough that they could probably hear its rotors if they stepped outside the command center. 8 minutes to decide whether to trust the system they'd sworn to serve, or to trust their instincts about right and wrong in a world where the two didn't always align. Hayes made the decision for all of them. "Torres, send a priority message to CENTCOM. Tell them we have a security breach at Kandahar and are implementing emergency protocols under my direct authority. No aircraft land or take off without verification through official channels. Sir, that helicopter has JSOC authorization. That helicopter has forged JSOC authorization, Hayes interrupted. Real special operations don't announce themselves with advanced flight plans and passenger manifests. They just appear, complete their mission, and disappear. This is something else. He turned back to Vega, his scarred face set in the expression of a man who'd made peace with the consequences of his choices. Phoenix, I need you to tell me everything. The extraction route, the safe houses, the contact protocols, everything you remember about Operation Blackbird. Because in about 7 minutes, we're going to be at war with our own people, and the only way we win is if we know more than they think we know. Vega looked at the tactical display, watching the helicopter's steady approach toward Kandahar airfield. Somewhere aboard that aircraft were people who would kill her to protect secrets that weren't worth protecting, who would sacrifice American lives to preserve their access to Liu Wei-ming and the terrible knowledge he carried in his memory. For 8 years, she'd been dead to the world, content to fix aircraft and maintain the fiction that Captain Phoenix Castellanos had died over North Korea in a training accident. But now General Hayes was asking her to resurrect that identity, to become once again the pilot who'd flown impossible missions and survived unsurvivable odds. She thought about Iceman, about the way his voice had sounded over the radio in the seconds before his F-22 disintegrated around him. She thought about Liu Wei-ming, about the terror in his eyes when she'd found him in that North Korean cell. She thought about the 8 years she'd spent hiding from her own government, maintaining a cover identity that let her serve her country while staying invisible to the people who would use her knowledge for their own gain. And she made her choice. "Tors," she said, her voice carrying the authority of Captain Phoenix Castellanos, United States Air Force. "I need you to access the aircraft maintenance schedules and find me the fastest jet on this base." The young captain looked to General Hayes, who nodded grimly. "Because, sir," Phoenix continued, "if they want to find Liu Wei-ming, they're going to have to catch me first. And I've got 8 years of practice at being impossible to catch." Outside, the sound of rotor blades was growing louder, marking time like the heartbeat of approaching war. In 6 minutes, the helicopter would land and men with guns and authority would demand answers that could reshape the balance of global power. But Phoenix Castellanos had spent 8 years learning how to disappear, and she had no intention of making it easy for them. The war was about to begin, and this time she intended to win. The maintenance bay felt different now, charged with the electric tension that came from imminent action. Phoenix moved through the space with the fluid efficiency of someone born to work with machines that killed people, her hands checking systems and reading displays with the automatic precision of 8 years' experience. But underneath, the mechanic's routine was something else, the predatory focus of a fighter pilot preparing for combat. She'd chosen the F-16 she'd been working on earlier, not because it was the fastest aircraft on the base, but because she knew every bolt, every wire, every system that kept it in the air. The hydraulic leak she'd repaired was holding, the engines were running clean, and the weapons pylons were empty, which meant she could carry maximum fuel for maximum range. "Phoenix." General Hayes appeared beside her, carrying a flight helmet and a survival vest loaded with equipment that definitely wasn't standard issue. "Tors found what you asked for." She looked at the vest, nodding the GPS units, emergency radios, and other gear that spoke of preparation for long-distance flight over hostile territory. Where did this come from? Special Operations keeps a cache of equipment for situations that require flexibility in interpretation of orders, Hayes said diplomatically. Consider it borrowed. The helmet was different too, newer than standard issue, with integrated heads-up display capability and communication systems that could interface with classified networks. This wasn't equipment for a routine flight. This was gear for the kind of mission that would either save lives or end them, depending on who was asking the questions. "Sir, I need to know where Liu is," she said, pulling on the vest and checking the fasteners with automatic precision. The extraction protocols I used 8 years ago assumed he'd be moved immediately to a secure facility, but JSOC has probably relocated him multiple times since then. Hayes handed her a small device that looked like a standard GPS unit, but carried markings that indicated military encryption. Liu Weiming is currently held at a facility designated Safe House 7. Coordinates are loaded into the unit, along with current security protocols and access codes. Phoenix stared at the device, understanding the implications immediately. "You've known where he was all along." "I've been his control officer for the past 6 years," Hayes admitted. "When the agency decided his intelligence was too valuable to risk in normal protective custody, they transferred oversight to a joint military intelligence task force. I was appointed as his primary contact because of my security clearance and my connection to the original extraction." The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that was both clearer and more complicated than anything she'd imagined. Hayes hadn't just recognized her tattoo by accident. He'd been waiting for 8 years for Phoenix to surface, knowing that eventually the people who wanted Liu's intelligence would connect the dots and come looking for the pilot who'd brought him out of North Korea. This was always the plan, she realized. Keep me in place as a backup extraction asset in case something went wrong with Liu's security. "The plan was to keep you safe," Hayes corrected. "But yes, there was always the possibility that we'd need Phoenix again. Liu's intelligence is too important to risk losing to the highest bidder, and there are people in our own government who see dollar signs instead of national security when they look at weapons technology." Through the maintenance bay doors, she could see military vehicles moving across the tarmac with unusual urgency. Security teams were establishing perimeters around critical facilities, while other units seemed to be positioning themselves to prevent anyone from leaving the base. The conflict Hayes had predicted was already beginning, playing out in the careful choreography of military units receiving contradictory orders from competing authorities. "How long do I have?" she asked, beginning the pre-flight checklist that would take her F-16 from maintenance status to combat ready. "The helicopter is 3 minutes out," Torres reported over the radio. "Base security is reporting multiple requests for landing clearance, but they're coming from different command authorities with conflicting authorizations." Phoenix climbed into the cockpit, her body remembering the familiar geometry of controls and displays even after 8 years of working on aircraft instead of flying them. The seat fit like it had been made for her, the control stick responding to her touch with the sensitivity of a finely tuned instrument. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember what it felt like to be Captain Phoenix Castellanos, to be someone who lived at the intersection of physics and courage, and the terrible beauty of flight. Then the moment passed, and she became the professional again, calm, focused, and absolutely lethal. "General, I need one more thing," she said, running through the engine start sequence. "When this is over, when I've extracted Liu and delivered him to whatever facility you designate as secure, I want something in return." Hayes looked up at her from the tarmac below, his scarred face caught between hope and resignation. "What?" "I want Iceman's real name added to the memorial wall," she said. "Major David Chen deserves to be remembered for who he really was, not buried under a cover story about training accidents." The F-16's engines were spinning up now, their whine building toward the crescendo that would give her wings again. On the radio, she could hear air traffic control trying to sort through the confusion of conflicting orders and unauthorized flights, their professional calm beginning to crack under the pressure of a situation that wasn't covered in any manual. "Done," Hayes said simply. Phoenix smiled for the first time in 8 years, the expression feeling strange on her face after so long hidden behind the mask of Staff Sergeant Vega Castellanos. "Then let's bring Liu home, sir. One more time." The canopy closed with a solid thunk that sealed her into the cockpit, cutting off the outside world and leaving her alone with the familiar symphony of jet engine noise and electronic systems. Through the heads-up display, she could see the helicopter approaching Kandahar from the north, its black silhouette stark against the afternoon sky. But Phoenix was already moving, the F-16 rolling toward the runway with the mechanical precision of a predator stalking prey. Behind her, she left Staff Sergeant Vega Castellanos in the maintenance bay, along with 8 years of careful anonymity and the comfortable fiction that Hero stayed dead when the mission was over. Ahead lay Liu Weiming, the most valuable intelligence asset in the modern world, and the people who would kill to control him. Between them and their target stood one resurrected fighter pilot in a stolen F-16, carrying nothing but skill and determination, and the absolute certainty that some things were worth fighting for, even if it meant going to war with your own people. The tower was calling for her to identify herself, to explain her unauthorized taxi to the runway. In response, Phoenix pushed the throttles forward and felt the F-16 surge beneath her like a living thing eager to return to its natural element. The runway stretched ahead, a ribbon of concrete that led from earth to sky, from mechanic to pilot, from the dead to the living. At the far end of that runway, she would either find redemption or destruction. But for the first time in 8 years, Captain Phoenix Castellanos was exactly where she belonged, in the cockpit of a fighter jet, racing toward trouble at 500 miles per hour, carrying the hopes of the living and the honor of the dead. The F-16 broke ground with the violent grace of a predator launched from a slingshot, climbing through the thin air above Kandahar with engines that screamed their defiance at gravity and earth, and everything that tried to hold her down. Phoenix felt the familiar surge of acceleration pressing her back into the ejection seat, her body remembering the physics of flight, even after 8 years of keeping her feet on the ground. Below, the sprawling geometry of Kandahar airfield fell away like a discarded map, revealing the harsh beauty of Afghanistan's landscape, endless mountains that,